Toothless, Scene 3, The Cave, Part 5. Bizarria couldn't keep the water off her boots. She kicked, but it lapped up to her ankles now. She did not want to go back, but she knew she could not stay here. Rapid bursts of trilling laughter escaped her throat as fear and hysteria threatened to take over. Albrecht unexpectedly emerged from the water just a few meters away from Bizarria. He was shouting and pointing, but not at her. Following the direction of his focus, Bez saw the doctor running further into the cave. Dr. Meadowlark was headed for the pale light that leaked from a crack in the cave. It did not look as high as it used to. She then noticed the mortician was also wading and swimming, with more difficulty, toward the pale light. Bizarria cursed at the mortician, recognizing he was likely her best chance of survival. The Magi closed her eyes tightly and counted to herself. She opened her eyes, hesitated, then counted again before letting go, and clumsily sliding off the stalagmite. Bizarria moved through the chest-deep water toward the mortician as quickly as possible, partly swimming, partly wading. "I know what's happening!" Bizarria yelled as she neared Albrecht, Franklin, and the exit. "I know it's him, who the guy is!" The Magi struggled to form words around her anxiety and breathlessness. "There's nothing we can do. We've got to get out." "What?" Albrecht turned to face Bizarria. "I know who is in the water." She spoke slowly, concentrating on clearly forming each word. "We got to go." Albrecht's large eyebrows came down over his concentrated, deep-set eyes. He spoke while pointing with an open hand. "The statue?" "No!" "The statue," Albrecht pressed, "represents your fears." Bizarria stopped and blinked in confusion at the mortician's response. "Wait, what's up with the statue?" "Your fears are in the statue. I'm willing to bet that if you face your fears in the statue, this will all stop. You need to make amends with the spirit." "But it wasn't my fault." Bez threw her hands up in the air, her voice shrill. "I swear, I'm not the one who does the dirty work." "We don't have a choice." The old man made a sweeping motion that encompassed the flooding cave. "Apologize to the rock!" Franklin yelled. He held a pickaxe in one hand and shook out the other hand as he winced with pain. "Yeah, apologize to the rock," Albrecht echoed, pointing to the statue in the center of the cave. "We should both apologize." Bizarria looked longingly at the light leak through the cave wall. That light contained the one thing she was begging for: escape. She looked toward the statue, then quickly turned from it. The stone statue was in the opposite direction of safety, in the middle of the cave, and it looked so far away. From here, she could only see the backside of the stone figure, and it was becoming harder to see as the water rose and the light dimmed. The eerie blue cave light was faint now, and the deeper cave shadows were more foreboding. Seeing Bez's hesitation, Albrecht held the circus magician's hand and gently but firmly guided her away from the lighted hope of escaping. They did not speak as the mortician led them into the cave's darkness, where the statue was slowly drowning. Bizarria silently wondered why she would let this man lead her into this consuming blackness. The mortician held his toothbrush high in one hand and held Bizarria's hand tightly with the other. Blue-green light danced over the dark, difficult, ominous chest-high waters. The ground was uneven and slick. A few deep pockets in the floor caused them to dip nearly to the neck, while some of the high spots brought the water level to mid-torso. Despite his concerns over the toothbrush being tainted, Albrecht felt this was the best tool he could rely on when confronting forces of the supernatural. The toothbrush was a guide to help spirits pass on to the next world. Albrecht hoped it would also be a tool to help him make amends with a vengeful spirit. It was cold. Bizarria felt the raucous sounds of falling water were becoming more muted the deeper they went. Despite the increasing darkness and muffling sounds, Bizarria took comfort in recognizing that she had not yet been pulled into the abyss. As they neared the statue, the two were shoulder-deep in the water, The tall rock figure was a head taller. Bizarria felt much smaller as they moved around to the front. The rock-hewn figure grinned wickedly over the two companions. It stood at a slanted angle in the water, like one side had fallen slightly deeper than the other side. As Albrecht held the dimly lit toothbrush near the rock's ill-defined face, evil seemed to brood from its cold darkness. Still holding Bess's hand tightly with his other hand, the mortician attempted to commune with the spirit that haunted these waters.
"I would like to speak to the spirit who haunts this cave, those who would find through wrongdoings of their own."
His words sounded faintly of a chant, and the final note hung on the white noise surrounding them as Albrecht waited for the spirit to respond. The static of water falling enveloped them and even seemed to mute time itself, yet still the old man waited. His voice twitched as he struggled to maintain composure. His mind raced as he held up the toothbrush, waiting for something to happen. The rock-hewn maniacal grin was bearing down on him. He could recall how everything happened so naturally back at the funeral home. Yet here, Albrecht could not recall the skill required to use his toothbrush.
"What are you waiting for?"
Curly was prostrate on his makeshift raft, floating closer to them while riding the rocky waters. The quizzical expression on the cowboy's face implied he had observed the strange interaction from the start. Albrecht bowed his head in concentration and continued to hold his toothbrush to the statue's face.
"Are you going to brush its teeth?"
Curly asked.
"No,"
Albrecht snapped, but maintained his stance.
"I am trying to commune with the spirit and make amends, if possible."
"What?"
"I need to figure out the root cause of this spirit's actions. I only know there's a spirit here. I don't know why it's here."
"You haven't figured that out yet?"
"I know it was killed, but that's never a good enough reason to haunt a place. Lots of people die every day, but that doesn't mean they are all left behind to haunt things."
"I thought you would have figured this out by now."
"Well, I don't know."
Despite bowing his head and closing his eyes, Albrecht's concentration was eroding as the rising water threatened to lap up his nose. From the agitation of the cowboy's persistent bantering and this uncooperative toothbrush that refused to glow properly, Albrecht spared a glance back at Bizarria.
"Do you know anything that could help here?"
Bizarria shook her head. "Everything is kind of muted here, and making it really hard to hear what's going on, so I haven't heard a lot of what's being said by you guys."
"Come on, guys," Curly yelled out. "I'll figure this out, and I'm not even supposed to know what's going on. I've also spent the majority of this time trying to hear through all the noise and water," Albrecht yelled back.
"So?" Albrecht abruptly returned to his stance. He faced the statue with the upheld toothbrush and forcibly ignored the distractions surrounding him. Breathe. Concentrate. Why? Images started to flow through Albrecht's mind. Lake. Burning corpse. Fire.
"I know exactly who this person is,"
Albrecht snapped at his toothbrush. Albrecht closed his eyes tight and focused harder.
"That's not the question in my mind. I'm trying to figure out how to make amends with the person in this lake."
The container was opened, and he was gently removed from its confinement. A gentle breeze caressed him as it flew by and carried his ashes across the water.
"I know this. This is all very clear to me. But this doesn't tell me how I need to make amends with the spirit."
He saw the mortician looking into the container. He was tilted and then shaken from the bag. In a thick cloud of gray, he plunged into the cold shallows of the lake. It was a strange sensation to be suspended underwater while simultaneously sinking and expanding. He began to feel every drop of the lake's waters moving through the swaying vegetation to the silt. A small, narrow fish swam through his cloud of ash, further expanding his sensation of the lake. Focusing up, He again saw the mortician looking down. The mortician's face distorted and changed as the water surface rippled and moved. The sensation of understanding of the young man's otherworldly experience did little to quell the mortician's frustration. Albrecht's anger was a glowing coal that threatened to burst into flames. The toothbrush always worked so well back at the funeral home. Of all the times for it not to work, this one was the wrong time. He exhaled sharply, sucked in another breath, bowed his head, and pressed on.
Yeah, like I said, I know exactly who this person is. I know I burnt him. I know I threw the ashes in the lake.
Nothing. The images were gone.
This still doesn't tell me why he is here. This doesn't tell me why he's haunting this place. What in his past is driving this? Frankly, he was already dead by the time he got to me. People don't haunt people for reasons like how they died after they were already dead. People haunt people for what happened to them in their life. I don't know what happened to him in his life.
Still nothing.
He was already dead by the time he got to me. That's why I need to communicate with the spirit. Having a conversation allows me to investigate and find out why he is haunting this place.
Albrecht looked up at the statue. Instead of evil, the figure's grin now seemed to mask pain and regret. The mortician focused on his family's toothbrush.
No detective can solve a case without talking to people. A real investigation requires you to talk to people. Toothbrush. Eisenbergers, I need you so I can communicate with the spirit.
Albrecht, knowledge, toothbrush modifier. 4. Success, normal DT. This time, it wasn't visions of the past that flowed through his subconscious. Albrecht could see the present for what it was. He saw the statue. It was a vessel that could house spirits and amplify their emotions and powers. The figure carved of rock held spirits captive until they faded into the past. The stone felt old, very old, and it held many spirits through the ages. Albrecht smiled. It finally felt like the toothbrush was working. Albrecht let go of Bizarria's hand and grasped her by the shoulder, bringing her closer to him. Albrecht closed his eyes, kept his head bowed, and pushed further in his communion with the spirit haunting the water. The toothbrush began to glow brighter. The glow was an ethereal greenish hue that began small but quickly expanded. As the glow increased in size, it became a bubble encompassing Bizarria and Albrecht. The process was surreal and disorienting for Bez. As she looked around, the Magi began to see things that did not appear to be of this world. It was as if the bubble was an all-encompassing window that allowed the two of them to see into the ethereal realm.
I am sensing the spirit's presence, Albrecht said with eyes still closed. I can see the spirit of the person who was killed and feels wronged by you. He harbors much negative emotion. This is the reason he's become a part of this place.
Albrecht paused and tilted his head as if listening for a faint sound.
I can also see the statue. It's inhabited by horrors and spirits. This allows the statue to amplify the fears of those around it.
Bez watched in horror as the waters quickly rose and submerged the bubble, trapping the Magi and the Mortician once again in the abyss. Bizarria felt gripped by fear incarnate as she saw the tall, elongated statue bearing down with its wicked grin. Her throat tightened, and she choked on a scream she could not let loose. Her hands went from grasping her throat to clawing at Albrecht's arm. Her breath was fast and ragged as she seemed to race down into the very depths of the abyss. All the while, the statue remained within inches of their bubble. Her eyes remained locked on the figure of rock as its face swirled and shifted. The unburnt face of the young circus hand was now on the statue's face. The young man's face was empty and pained. His gaze was unwavering as he looked down upon the Magi. "I'm so sorry," Bizarria's voice was quiet and trembling. She was shaking uncontrollably, but she could not look away. "I never wanted this for you." The young man continued to look upon the Magi, unmoved, unchanged. Bizarria repeated softly as tears dripped down her face. "I'm so sorry. Please." Bizarria, charisma. 2, success. Normal DT. The face of Bizarria's friend faded, leaving the featureless statue that held the hint of a kinder smile. It was all so strange for the cowboy. He adjusted his position on the pallet and pushed his cowboy hat firmly on his head. In one moment, he was having a healthy conversation with the odd little man. In the next moment, the old man and the magician had gone under the water. Curly briefly considered dipping into the water to look for the couple, but he knew that dangerous snake was hiding in the shadows of that sinking statue. However, Curly also recalled Albrecht and Franklin diving into the unknown waters, searching for each other. They were risking their lives, facing unknown fears for a chance at saving each other. The security guard vacillated between the safety of his pallet and his promise to keep people safe. Curly growled. Snake or none, he would not risk another life to his fear. The cowboy repositioned himself, being careful not to capsize the pallet. He placed his feet against a long, nearby stalagmite and kicked hard. Curly, heel kick. 2, success. Easy DT. The pallet pushed hard through the water, slowly spinning but returning to the snake-inhabited statue. Curly's head twisted side to side as he attempted to search for signs of the vanished couple. "Hello?" Curly yelled. "Magician lady? Old man?" Bizarria the Magi suddenly burst from the water next to the cowboy and his wooden pallet. "Magician lady!" Curly responded happily. Bizarria yelped and sputtered as she struggled to keep her head above the water. What's your name?" "It's Bizarria," she managed to say between splashes and hyperventilated breaths. "Grab on." Bizarria reached out to grab the pallet when a sudden wave rushed into them. The water swirled and the Magi panicked as she felt her feet being pulled into the current. Curly rolled and seized Bizarria's hand, keeping her from going under the water. The pallet rocked violently, but it did not flip over. Bez sputtered and choked as she struggled to keep hold of Curly with both hands. "What happened?" She sputtered and choked, trying to see through the water dripping from her face. "What happened to Albrecht?" "I don't know," Curly huffed. The pallet was slowly sinking with the magician's added weight, so the cowboy dipped into the water, maintaining a tight hold of the wooden flotation device. "You tell me. You guys were chatting it up while you were here in front of the statue, then you were gone." "The statue is normal now, I think." Bizarria wiped her face as she clung to the pallet. "I don't know what happened to Albrecht." "Well, reach down and grab him." "He's not there to grab." Bizarria and Curly stared at each other in earnest perplexity. Both were in the water, holding on to opposite sides of the bobbing pallet. They floated silently in the rocking water, waiting for the other to speak. "Do you want to stay around here and look for him?" Bizarria asked. "I don't really have a looking skill." Curly raised an eyebrow. "You don't have eyes?" "It's a really dark cave. What can I say?" Curly looked over the water's surface for a sign of Albrecht. "Look, I haven't had a good experience so far," Bizarria explained. "I would really like to just get out of here." Curly looked back at the statue. Only the top half of its head remained above the surface. "So the statue's normal now." He did not look at Bez, but watched for any slithering on the water's surface. Bizarria shrugged in response. "It's like a damn weeping angel without wings." Curly shuddered slightly as he muttered his thought. The cowboy looked over the waters again. Everyone, including himself, always came back in a different place from where they were initially pulled in. Curly felt confident that Albrecht would not be found here. "He'll pop up somewhere," Curly decided. "Let's start moving over to the exit." "Sounds good." Bizarre was relieved that she was once again leaving the cursed water. The pair adjusted their locations on the pallet to be on the same side. Then they began kicking toward the light. Together, they swam through the rolling waters and fought against a rising current. The stalactite above threatened to chomp and devour them every time the water rose. However, a measure of hope was felt as they heard the sound of a pickaxe breaking rock.